Okay, guys, welcome to this week's group call. As I mentioned in the school community, I wanted to chat a little bit tonight about my fitness pal and a bunch of different, I guess you could call them hacks that we can start using to one, make the process just a hell of a lot easier and more simple so it's not as confusing and time consuming. Two, to make sure that we're tracking accurately because it can make a big difference, particularly if there's a few things that we're tracking consistently that are just inaccurate. And three, just to give you guys some insight into like how I track. I mean, I've been doing this now since probably like 2012 or 2011, and so I've been using MyFitnessPal for a very long time, and there's obviously been a number of different things I've kind of learned with it over time. And so hopefully you can implement these if you're not already, just to make the whole journey a bit easier. I talk about it a lot with you guys, either in our one-on-one calls or on the group stuff. Like my whole job or my intention with all of you is to just show you how simple getting body composition results can and should be, to remove as much of the guesswork as possible, and I guess lastly to give you as much confidence as possible that you can do this and you can control your own results. And so yes, I love the fact that you guys are working with me, and I think the accountability and the mindset stuff is fantastic, and that's something that obviously takes time to build on. But outside of that, I want to be able to give you the tools so that you feel like you don't necessarily need me to get results, but you can hang around as long as you want. I promise it's fine. But you get what I'm trying to say. I don't want you to have to feel like you always need to follow a plan given to you by someone else in order to see results. And if you can have that level of confidence within yourself, then it removes the doubt, removes the uncertainty, and you're only going to enjoy this whole thing a hell of a lot more. And so, the first thing with MyFitnessPal is it tends to tell you a lot of different shit inside the app. Tells you a lot of stuff. It'll give you recommendations of how much you should be eating per day. Now, the first thing, disregard that. Obviously, go off what I'm asking you to consume in the app, and so there's obviously ways we can change the settings. If you guys haven't read or if you haven't downloaded my actual kind of how-to guide for MyFitnessPal, I'll put that in the comments below in the group when I upload the replay, so you can have a look at that. But disregard basically everything it tells you in the app, which sounds a bit crazy, but ideally you're kind of just following what macros and calories that I've kind of set for you guys. Um, However, if you do want to change the goals in the app so it is aligned with what you're actually aiming for in my app, you simply just go to the settings. I'm just going to check to make sure I'm giving you the right advice here. But you just go to the settings in MyFitnessPal and you should be able to click on, I believe it is goals. Yep. And then once you're on goals, you just go down to the nutrition goals and click on calorie, carbs, protein, and fat goals. And you can just change your, I don't know if this will even come up, might be a bit bright, but you can just change your targets in there. And so it's based off percentages unless you've got the premium app. I don't think it's necessary to have the premium app. If you've got it, then sweet. I'm sure there's some great functions you can use, but realistically, it's not that necessary. And so you can just change your calorie target. If you want to make sure that the protein targets and stuff are lined up, you can change your percentages to get it as close as what I've given you with your target. However, it does not matter, like I said, what the app is telling you. The only thing that you realistically need to be watching inside that app is just whether or not you're finishing at your target by the end of the day. And so making sure, obviously, your calorie goal is as close as possible to what I've given you. And then if you scroll all the way down, sorry, this is, oh, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you should be able to click on nutrition. So there's a little tab down the bottom that says nutrition. And inside here, I always just keep it on nutrients, macros. I always keep it on this. So once you're close to your calorie target, you're just going to use this to make sure that your protein minimum has been met. And that is literally it. That's all you really need to use MyFitnessPal for in terms of the tracking aspect. As close as possible to calorie targets, meeting your protein minimum, disregard what ratio of carbs and fats is saying. Like it's just not necessary. Yes, we could track all three macronutrients, carbohydrates, protein, and fat. It realistically makes not much of a difference at all. And so if you're sticking to your calorie target, hitting your protein minimum, the rest is all taken care of. If you have an intention of getting like lean to the level of competing in bodybuilding or physique competition, which 99, if not 100% of you aren't at this stage. And there's obviously nothing wrong with that. If that becomes a goal of yours, then that's fantastic. But that's realistically only when I would get a little more detailed with how many grams of carbs and fats you're consuming, purely because of the fact that once you're, let's say, sub 10% body fat, variations can drastically kind of change the way you look just because of the fact that you're so lean that slight changes in water retention and sodium and all that type of stuff you can visually see a bit of a difference. However, that's not going to be the case majority of the time. And so even for myself, I only just track calories and protein. So the next thing inside of here that's worth kind of talking about is if you have a meal that you have basically every single day. So I'm quite a big fan of eating similar stuff most days, particularly for like certain meals, like breakfast being one of them. You don't have to do that. I think it can be quite helpful just to keep it consistent, so you're not having decision fatigue every day of being, constantly consumed by, okay, how many calories am I up to? What can I have next? What can I have next? And it becomes just a bit consuming, right? So what you can do is when you click on one of the meals, once you go add a meal, you can actually just create a meal. And so I would go into my meals and click on create a meal. Oh, create a meal up here. And then you can actually just build out your own meal. So for example, if I usually have a pretty similar smoothie most days, or I might have protein oats, and the ingredients is basically the same all the time. So instead of me going in and adding each individual ingredient every single time I have it, I can just create the meal and save it as a meal. And I would, put the title as whatever, DK's protein oats, or um, high protein smoothie, whatever. And so then each morning I can just go into my app. It's going to be saved in the library now as that meal. And I think I've actually got one in here from a while back. Yeah, so this one here I created a fair while back. It's not even using our own protein. That shows you how long ago it was. But I just built out a meal with the same ingredients that I was having every day. So I can just go in and tap that instead of adding each individual ingredient. So that's something that I would recommend. If you're cooking a lot for yourself, or if you've got a meal that you like to make up, it just saves time and becomes a hell of a lot easier for you. The next thing would be around, I'm going to say around eating out. And so we've obviously had discussions around strategies to do that. And that's not what we're talking about today. It's more so how to actually select what option you're going to go with. So there's a couple of different ways you can do it. First one is that if you're eating at like a big chain restaurant or franchise, most of the time they'll have verified options. So I'm a regular customer at Nando's, and so Nando's tend to have verified options for basically everything on their menu. Now, is it going to be perfect? No, most likely not. And when you eat out, it's never really going to be exactly the amount that you've had. However, it will be consistent. And so consistency is more important than perfection with nutrition, in my opinion. And so that's the first option. The second option, if it's something that isn't in there, would be to overestimate and just pick an option that you use every time. So sushi is probably a good example, right? I used to eat a lot more sushi than what I have been recently, but with sushi, there's a million different options and they all look pretty varied, to be honest. And you don't want to be sitting there going, fuck, which one is it? How should I choose? Like, and thinking about it all day. Who cares? Overestimate slightly. So whatever, just pick one that's not all the way, like, don't pick one that says it's got like 5 calories in it, because that's obviously not it. And also don't pick one that says it's got 20,000 calories in it, because that's not it. Pick one kind of like in between that you can stay consistent with. And so every time you eat sushi afterwards, from that point onwards, from that day onwards, just choose the same option each time. Okay. And so again, like, common theme here is that it doesn't need to be perfect. Like, I haven't tracked the perfect day of my meals for 10 years, and you don't need to. It just needs to be close enough to what we're trying to do, and it needs to be consistent. So eating out, we're either picking a generic option that looks like it's maybe slightly above what it actually would be. And the purpose of that is just so then, if anything, we're actually under our target for the day and we're not just blowing out. Again, it's always pretty what's the word? It's always pretty tempting to choose one that looks like it's got like no calories in it. And you're like, fuck yeah, how good is this? My Big Mac only has 10 calories. But that is not it. That's not the case. And it's probably never going to be. Okay. And so that's going to be the most accurate for you. The next thing I wanted to bring up is around actually tracking your days. And as I briefly touched on before, we don't want to be obsessed with MyFitnessPal. We don't want to be consumed by MyFitnessPal. And so something that I've done for quite a long time, and I would highly recommend you guys do this too, is to track ahead or plan ahead. Now, whether that's the night before, whether that's the morning of, doesn't have to be, again, doesn't have to be perfect. You don't need to know every detail for the day, but if you roughly know what you're going to be eating, even if it's just for a few of the main meals, just plug them in before you even start the day. And the reason being, it gets quite difficult and consuming if you're tracking as you go all day, every day, because then you're constantly going, okay, well, how much have I got left? Like, what could I have for dinner? How much am I going to have left over after dinner? Or, vice versa. And so to me, that's just, it's unnecessary. And if you're having, as I said, like relatively consistent meals or foods most days, then it just takes away the decisions that you need to make. And it also allows you to reverse engineer. And so what I mean by that is if I've tracked in the morning an estimate of what I'm going to have for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I might have whatever, 500 calories left over or 600 calories left over for the day. And so that's the amount of calories that I would then go and use for snacks or save it for dessert or have it between meals, knowing that even if it's only mid morning and I'm using some of my calories for a snack that I feel like eating, like I might go out for coffee and I want to get a muffin or something or whatever, I can eat that and know that it's not actually taking away from what I can eat later in the day because I've already accounted for it. And so by the time I get for dinner, I might have 0 calories left, but I've actually plugged in the meal that I was going to have, which might be 5, 6, 700 calories, whatever it ends up being for that meal. And so planning ahead reduces the amount of decisions you need to make, reduces that decision fatigue, which is a big one. Like I think I've talked about this either on a group call or with some of you individually, but when you look at people like Steve Jobs, right, who wore the same shit every single day when he was alive, it's probably not because he loved the jeans and the turtleneck skivvy. It's probably because of the fact that it was one less decision that he needed to make every single day. And so that's a bit extreme. I'm assuming most of you guys don't wear the same shit every day like a Simpson, but if you do, congrats. But afterwards, I'm just saying like the less decisions we can make, the better. Okay. And so again, it's all about remove the stress, remove the uncertainty, remove the overwhelm about all of this shit, and just make it as simple as possible. As like simplicity is always going to be your best option. So now I wanted to just touch on actually tracking what you're eating and how to make sure it is as accurate as possible. Now, again, doesn't need to be perfect. However, some small uh, deficiencies or incorrect tracking can lead to quite vast variations between how much you've actually had and how much you think you've had. So here's how I look at it. The first thing I'll talk about is protein sources. Okay, and so anything that you buy that is that needs to be cooked. Okay, so whether it's meat, fish, even things like potatoes, which is obviously not a protein source, but I just thought I'd throw that in there. Um, Anything like that, I would say outside of rice, and I'll explain why in a second. Anything that's raw that you need to cook, add it into MyFitnessPal as the raw weight. Okay, so if you're having a piece of steak, don't weigh it once it's been cooked. Weigh it before it's being cooked. And there's a few reasons why. One, it's going to be consistent every time because it's not going to be consistent if you weigh it after you've cooked it. Because if I poach it, if I grill it, if I fry it, if I bake it, or whatever the fuck I do with it, most likely the weight is going to be quite different after all 4 or 5 of those options in comparison to the others. So if you're poaching chicken, it's probably going to be heavier at the end than what it would be if you put it on a frying pan. And so you're going to have it's going to be all over the place. Now, even if you're prepping meals or food for the week, if you've got a kilo of chicken, You don't have to make sure that every day you've put in like 100 grams or 200 grams to make sure it's perfect. Literally just cook it all and fucking chop it up into 5 different servings if you want to have it each weekday, and just average it out and just say, okay, well, lunch each day is going to be 200 grams of chicken. Okay. And so the reason why I said rice, don't do it with your rice. You can, if you want, you can weigh it like raw rice. Fuck, that's actually really hard to say. Raw rice. Raw rice, you can weigh it first before you cook it if you like. I am traditionally quite lazy with cooking, and so I'll usually have like rice pouches or the cups because it's fucking easy. And so I'm just using the weight. I'm just scanning the barcode. Right now, cooked rice as well. You can just choose the option in MyFitnessPal of cooked rice because it's pretty much all cooked the same. I think, as far as I know, rice is cooked one way. Could be cooked multiple ways. I don't know. I'm pretty sure it's one way. So the cooked weight is always going to be pretty similar. On the topic of barcodes, if you're not doing that already, do it. So there's a function in MyFitnessPal where when you go to add a meal, barcode. So anything in a packet, literally just scan the barcode. So not that Pepsi Max really has any calories, but I can just scan this and it brings up the exact thing that I'm having. And if it's out of a packet, just choose how many servings you've had. So if you're eating what? If you're eating, you got a big bag of popcorn, right? And you don't want to eat the whole thing. Just figure out how many servings are in the bag. Either you can weigh it using food scales if you want how much you've had, which I would probably recommend. Again, it takes 2 seconds to do. It's not obsessive. It's just smart because you're guaranteeing that you're going to see results. But either weigh it or just eyeball it and just add in the amount of servings. The other thing is condiments. Now, this one just typically gets overlooked because it's such a small addition. However, certain condiments can add a shit ton of calories to your day if you're not careful. And so, obviously, things like cooking oil, if you're using a minimal amount and you're using that oil like every single day with what you're cooking, I feel like there's a bit of a pass for not tracking it. I typically use like an extra virgin olive oil spray. Like I've got this spray that I use. So I usually just put on like one spray and then that'll be it. So I don't usually track it. However, if you're using lots of oil, then oil is high in fats. And so fats is the highest per gram calorie macronutrient. So carbohydrates and fats are worth 4 calories per gram. Sorry, carbohydrates and protein worth 4 calories per gram. Fats is worth 9 calories per gram. So more than double. So if I'm having like 20 mil of oil and I'm not tracking it at all, and I'm using that every single day, then your calories are at least a couple of hundred calories above your target pretty much every single day. And so it kind of takes away from the ability to predict what needs to be changed if we're not accurately tracking day in, day out. And again, it doesn't need to be perfect, but it's going to be way off if you're not tracking that. Things like sauces, I usually use like some of the low sugar or low, well, not low salt, just the low sugar or lower calorie options for my sauce. Like I actually show you one now, which is my favorite. Not that anyone asked, but I'm going to show you anyway. This is like one of my go-tos at the moment. So it's like a light sweet chili sauce. And so it still has calories in it, but there's like, I'd say a usual one of these per serve may be around like 50 or so calories per serve, whereas this is 4 calories per serve. So it's a big difference. Again, like if you're having multiple meals where you're using sauces that are either not tracked or higher in calories, like it adds up. Same with coffees and things. Like if you're having milk with your coffee, just add it into MyFitnessPal and just like if you might have 2 coffees a day, right? If you have 2, you might add in 50 mil or 100 mil of milk and just add that in there. And that's it. You obviously don't need to track the actual coffee itself because that's next to no calories. But if you're adding milk to it, that's calories. And so it's starting to look at, okay, am I adding basically all the things I'm actually having, or am I just skipping out on a few things? And so I'll always, remain consistent around the fact it doesn't need to be perfect. But if there's all these little things that accumulate throughout the day, it does add up. And so if you're unsure as to why things may be not working, or why there's inconsistencies with your, whether you're taking average weight or just how you look in progress photos and stuff, this can play a bit of a role. Now, things that I don't track, and I would highly recommend you guys don't either, kind of sounds, now I'm saying it out loud, sounds like it goes against exactly what I just said, but hope it doesn't. I do not track things like this, like a Pepsi Max that has like whatever, fucking maybe 1 or 2 calories in it. Like, I don't track that unless you're drinking like 1,000 a day, then there's no need. I also don't track green vegetables or like green salad. So yes, there is a little bit of calories in certain vegetables, like even the green ones. However, because they're high in fiber, the likelihood of you eating that much of them that it's going to actually make a dent in your calorie intake for the day is quite low. And if anything, it's a good thing that you're eating a lot of vegetables, because you are getting more fiber. The likelihood of overeating afterwards is now a lot less. And so I don't track green vegetables. I don't track like 0 calorie drinks. With the vegetable thing though, if it's not green, 90% of the time, track it. Okay, if it's not green, track it. If it is green, don't worry about tracking it. Okay, and don't be using like any food dye and stuff to turn your other veggies green so you don't have to track it. But it's so just in general, guys, like I've covered a number of these different things, and I'm just trying to think if there's any other major ones that would be worth looking at. I guess the other thing, which I probably spoke to all of you about at some point, is that we have our protein minimum that each and every single one of you are aiming for at the moment. You're more than welcome to go way above that. It's not going to have a negative impact at all. If anything, it probably helps. It's the only thermogenic macronutrient there is, and it's not to say that if you just eat protein only that you're going to see amazing results in comparison to not doing that. However, if you're meeting your protein minimum and you're going above, that's completely fine, right? As I said before, protein is worth the same amount of calories per gram as carbohydrates. And so for me, if I'm in a deficit, if I'm meeting my protein minimum, I would usually prefer to get the rest of the calories from either carbohydrates or fats, because it's going to taste better most of the time. But more importantly, it's just going to be probably a little better for energy and stuff throughout the day as well. But if not, if you go over, that's completely fine. It's not a bad thing. And then the last thing I think I should mention, what was it? Oh, last thing I'll say. Now, those that are on the call, if there's a question that's like jumping out at you at the moment that you have that I haven't covered, I'll get you to jump in 1 second. But the last thing I'll say is, if you get home or you're at the end of the day and you are, let's say you're pretty much finished your calorie intake and you're way below your protein minimum, there's 2 things to look at. First one is, if it's a regular occurrence, something needs to change. Okay. If it's a once off, don't stress. If you, for whatever reason, really feel like you want to hit your protein, then choose something that is pretty much just protein to go over your calorie intake. It's not the end of the world, like I've kind of mentioned before. I actually can't remember whether I said it on this call or the call before with Viv, but I'm going to repeat something in a second anyway. Protein intake is important, guys. Like, not only for obviously muscle growth and repair, for metabolism, but also just to keep you fuller for longer. And so that's why I recommend throughout your day, like regardless of how many meals you're having, try and have an not even, but like a regular distribution of protein, ideally with most meals. It'll keep you fuller for longer. And we have something called muscle protein synthesis, which helps with the repair and growth of your muscles. And it's kind of like a light switch. And so you would have heard people talk about, as I just said, consistent protein servings, and the ideal range of protein for one serve is usually between around 20 to 35 grams of protein. Once you go above that, it's not a waste, as in, like, if I go out and have steak and the total protein for that meal is like 50 grams, it's the remaining 15 or whatever above the 35 grams is not going to waste. at all. Like your body still utilizes it. However, muscle protein synthesis, which I just mentioned, is kind of activated or triggered, I guess you could say, at around that 20 to 35 grams of protein whenever you're consuming it. And so it's like a light switch. If I turn a light on, and let's say in this case, turning the light on is having between 20 and 35 grams of protein, by having 50 or 60 grams, just because I push the light switch in a bit harder doesn't mean that the light's going to get any brighter. The light's already on. And so the only detrimental thing to having a massive amount of protein in one serving is the fact that you've just minimized the amount of times that you can stimulate or activate muscle protein synthesis throughout the day. So that's obviously a little bit more technical stuff, and there's really no need to go into any more detail than that. That was all basically just to say that try and keep a nice even distribution of your protein as the day goes on. Lastly, again, I can't remember whether I've mentioned this, but I'll just say it again. If you go over your calorie intake, similar to going under your protein intake, but if you go over your calories, you've got kind of a couple of options. One, if you're trying to be very, very diligent and very precise with your calories for the week, and you don't want to go over, you can obviously shave some calories off the coming days to even it out so that the average by the end of the week is the same. Most of the time, I would not recommend doing that. Again, unless there's a real need to do it, I would just say goldfish mentality, move on the next day, just go back to normal. Maybe drink a little bit more water because you may be holding a little bit more water in your body. However, if it's a regular occurrence, we need to change that. Okay. And so that's obviously something that you would talk about with me. But the reason why I said don't worry about it if you do go over is because if you're in a calorie deficit, and let's say you're in a deficit of 500 calories for the day, so you're 500 below your maintenance, across the span of a week, you're in a 3,500 calorie deficit. Okay, so 500 calories away from 7 days, you're in a 3,500 calorie deficit. So going over your intake by 200 calories one day is not fucking up your whole week. You're still in a 3,300 calorie deficit. So that should give you a bit of peace of mind around the fact that it doesn't need to be perfect. It can just be as close as possible, as consistent as possible, and you'll be sweet. And so that's kind of it, guys. Hopefully there's not too much in there, but hopefully there's enough for you to kind of take away and utilize and hopefully it's answered a couple of questions if any of you are kind of curious about that or there was things that you weren't 100% certain of. But yeah, if you have any questions about this and you're watching the replay, just comment below. I'll put the macros guide in there so you can check it out as well. But for those that are on live at the moment, thanks so much for tuning in. Hope you've taken something away from that and we can implement it.